Okay, so what I'm going to do today is actually this little guy. He's super cute. So I really like the vintagey style design. So I'm going to mostly focus on just the one because I don't want to overwhelm everybody. So we're just going to do the one. So I went ahead and just put a base on this tip with emotionally drained because I really liked that kind of like gray green backdrop. And the first thing that I'm going to do, like I said, I'm walking you guys from start to finish, how I do, if a client literally brought that picture into me, I'm going to walk you guys through my process and how I would do that on the nail. So first thing I do is I take a mechanical pencil. This is actually not the smallest. I usually use a 0.5. This is a 0.7, but you can have any pencil will work really. And even if you wanted to take just like a regular number 2 pencil, you could also just sharpen that and use that as well. There's really no right or wrong pencil, just a good old-fashioned graphite pencil. So I'm gonna try to get this as close to the camera as I can without losing quality here. So I'm gonna back off a little bit. Okay, so just looking at this picture, I'm gonna have this here just for reference. So what I like to do is kind of zoom into which parts I think I want on the nail. So I really want mostly this, and I want a little bit of that greenery back there, but I really want like his face, his little bow here, and then some of his antlers. So first I'm going to kind of decide where I'm going to start, but I'm going to put his head probably a little bit lower because I want to save room, like I said, for those antlers. So looking at this picture, I am going to just break this down into shapes. So looking at his little head, it's just a circle, right? So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm just going to create a circle. And I usually just kind of rough draw it. Like you could absolutely go through and you almost create a little target. So you would do a vertical line and a horizontal line and then connect them. And that's kind of how you create a more even circle. So creating that circle, then I'm going to come in and actually start to look at the details of and the shape of his head. And so I see right here is a little more flat, right? But then on this side, he has this little cheek that comes out. So I'm going to come into the circle and I'm just going to add his little cheek on there and then come down into his neck. And then on this side, I'm just coming straight down and creating kind of that straight, slightly curved neck over here. Then you can come in and start adding in the other details like his little ears. And these are going to be a little bit more difficult, but the thing is, this is just an outline, so I don't want you guys to stress too much about it. Just kind of sketch until it looks right. And you can kind of map out the facial features and things like that just a little bit. You don't want to do too much, but just to kind of see if you have the right general shape going on. I want to make sure his cheek comes out far enough and is rounded enough that I can fit his nose in there. So I have that. I'm not going to worry too much. Things like bows, if you're more comfortable painting them, I'm not too worried about making this perfect. I'm more just trying to map out space so that I have an idea of where everything goes. So I'm kind of working a little haphazardly. And then I'm going to look and see, because I've drawn my bow, so I'm going to see where his body comes out from the bow. And I'm going to mimic that on the nail. And I'm going to see where he comes out down here. So underneath, he's not really going to have a lot showing, and that's okay because I want to now move on to his antlers. Now, I'm not going to try to draw the actual outline of his antlers. I'm just going to kind of give myself a guideline of where I need them to go. And really, this doesn't have to be perfect because Nature is a little bit more like nature, animals, things like that. They're a little bit more forgiving as far as like nail art is concerned. So I'm just drawing the lines of his antlers. Nothing crazy. And then I'm not going to draw like any of the other details like the trees or like the little branches here. Those are all details that I'm going to add after the fact. Now, if you wanted to shrink him down, you could, but I'm going to leave him a little bit bigger because I want you guys to be able to see the detail more and what I'm doing. But you could absolutely shrink and proportion that image so that it is, so more of him is on the nail. But I just kind of want to focus on his cute little face. So the next thing I'm going to grab, I grabbed, I have a lot of ButterCreams here. So if you guys want to know what I'm using, I'll kind of walk through while I'm grabbing each one. But if you want to take a quick screenshot, this is everything I'm going to be using. These are all the ButterCreams that I'm going to be using. So if you just want to snap a screenshot of that, if you want to use all the same colors that I just used, that's everything. And I will be using black gel paint a little bit just for some really teeny tiny details. Let me move these guys back out of the way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is create the base of his body. So for that, I like to take my block brush and I'm going to take, that really resonates. So my block brush. And I'm just going to start filling in the areas that I've created for his, or drawn on for his body. And when I'm filling in, I'm not super concerned with making this my first layer. I'm not really worried about making it smooth. I'm just worried about making it kind of like where it needs to be. So it doesn't have to be even and perfect. I just want it to give me an overall guideline of where I'm supposed to be with my colors and where all the shading is. So as I'm applying, I'm kind of avoiding my other areas a little bit. Like I'm not fully covering the bow. I'm going a little bit over my lines here because I am going to go over this. So it's not that big of a deal, but just to kind of make sure that I have enough brown butted up to that bow, I'm going to go over it just a little bit. And as I'm doing this, it's just a little bit messier. Not messy per se, but it's not like I'm, worried about being super clean because we are going to go over and outline all of this. And then I'm going to come back in and kind of perfect it a little bit with a smaller brush. But I like to show you guys how I work on clients and how I can, knock out some crazier nail art in less time. So a lot of times that's because this is one of my steps. Like I'm not doing this with a tiny brush. I'm not super worried about making it extra perfect. I'm kind of just like getting the base layers on. And then I don't really have to think too much because once I have the base layers, then it's really just adding the detail and the shading. So I'm going to go ahead and cure that. And while that's curing, I'm going to check the chat for questions. So there's a question, do you prefer gel paint or ButterCreams for fine line detail and why? So I personally prefer the gel paints if I'm doing really fine line detail or outlining, anything like that, only because the ButterCreams are a thinner viscosity. And the gel paints are a lot thicker, so they stay put, and I can get a much thinner, skinnier line because it's so sticky, so to speak. So if I'm filling in a large space, like I love my buttercreams because they self-level really nice. They are super opaque, so they have great coverage. But if I'm trying to do a really tiny area, I want something that's not going to move. And that's nice time-wise as well, because when I'm working on my clients, then it doesn't become an issue where I am trying to flash cure in between each step. Okay, so now I'm going to take kind of a fatter liner brush to fill this and kind of perfect my outline. But again, I'm not super worried about making it perfect. I just want to make sure now that my color is even and make sure that my shape is where I like it. So as you're filling this in, you'll kind of realize whether or not you like how your original outline that you sketched, whether you like how it looks or not. Because an outline can look really good until you start to get color in there. And then you're like, oh, maybe his neck is a little wonky, or maybe his cheek needs to be a little bit bigger. And then you can kind of just push the color out and correct it as you're painting. So now that I have that second layer on there, I like how that looks. And then same thing with the bottom. I'm just going to fill in these areas. And I am trying to apply this thinly. That way, when I do come in with my other colors, it's not going to affect it. And then don't be worried about those little pencil markings either. We will get to that later. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to his little ears. And this is where you can really perfect the shape of the ears. And I'm actually going to leave kind of the bottom portion of the ear empty because I am going to fill that with a lighter color. So I'm just going to leave that. So now I'm going to go ahead and cure that. And I realized I did forget a color, so let me grab that really fast. Okay, now this color is discontinued. It's Wanna Be My Tarzan. This is one of my favorites to use for an off-white, but I have actually remade it and just mixed it in another pot with a little bit of really light yellow and just white. So like a little bit of Totally Taffy or leotards and leg warmers, like one of those if you have it. Another great option replacement for this would be one of the newer buttercreams, Heavenly. That one is really good as well. It just does have a teeny tiny bit of shimmer. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and use, since I have it in my drawer, I'm going to use this. But like I said, Heavenly would work just as well. Because it's a very fine shimmer. It's not like an aggressive shimmer. And then Real Red as well. Sorry for the bow. I'm also going to be using that. I'm going to go in now and add my bow. And I'm going to be using that Real Red. I guess that's kind of fuzzy. Okay, so now I'm just going to fill in very loosely that bow I created. And this is where I'm going to perfect the shape of that bow a little bit. And I like to create my bows with those really pretty like layers. So I always do kind of it's almost like a three, like you're going to come out and then in and then bump out a little bit in the center, come back in and then hit the bottom and then come back up to the center of the bow. And that's going to allow us to come in later and do way more layers and details on that bow. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to come in, back out, in, and back out. And trying to get your edges as clean and perfect as possible, but thin is more important than that. Thin is more important than perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to do my little ribbons. And ribbon on the other side. So you see how it kind of just almost fills in the space that you left behind. And then I'm just going to curve that in just a little bit to kind of make that little tail ribbon a little bit thicker. Okay, so once you like how your bow looks, which I think I do, we can go ahead and cure that. And I am curing each of these in my LED dot for 30 seconds in between layers, but I will do a full 60-second cure once I kind of have my base colors down. And then next color I'm going to be using, I'm going to do his antlers. So for that, I'm going to use a mixture of Taken for Granite and Please Be Seated. So that's what I'm going to use for his antlers now. So I'm going to use Taken for Granite first. And I'm going to just outline the lines I've created here. And I'm going to use a little bit more pressure on my brush. So I know I talk a lot about varying pressures in your brush. This is what I mean. So if I'm lifting and using very light pressure, I'm going to get a finer line and a finer point. But if I'm applying more pressure and using more body of my brush where it's bending more, then I'm going to get a thicker line. So when I'm doing these antlers, I'm going to apply less pressure for the smaller parts of the antlers and more pressure for the thicker parts of the antlers. And that way, I'm really not having to fill in. And this is why I don't worry too much about like where I was drawing them, because realistically, it is just a line. I'm just giving myself guidance, because when I'm coming in and I'm painting the lines, I'm just using brush pressure to create a thicker line instead of feeling like I have to draw the outlines of this skinny antler and then fill it in. I'm just strictly using brush pressure. So now I'm going to go ahead and clear that for 30 seconds in my LED dot. And we did have a question if this is going to be posted. This will be saved and it will be posted onto YouTube after we are done today. Okay, now I'm going to go in with my LE stripey brush. And please be seated. And I'm going to just very lightly go along those antlers and outline them a little bit. And I'm not really outlining so much as I am picking a side of the antler to darken. And I'm using a very small amount of buttercream. I'm not using a lot because I just want to add a little bit of shadowing. Nothing too crazy. Just enough to kind of darken the appearance and make them a little bit more visible. And again, I'm just applying a little bit of heavier pressure, not too heavy because I don't want to create such a wide line that it overtakes the original color that I put down, but just enough. And I love stripey because it gives you so much more control because it is so skinny compared to the brush that I was just using. So now I'm going to do my full cure because I have those base layers down. So now I'm going to cure it for 60 seconds. And then I'm going to show you guys why. Because once I'm done with those base layers, I'm actually going to wipe the whole nail. And that is going to get rid of all those pencil markings. And then it's also going to remove that inhibition layer. So when I go in and I start doing my detail work, it's going to be a lot easier and my brush is going to stick a little bit better to the nail itself. But so far, I've used block, I've used stripey, and then the only other brush I have here that's my absolute favorite, or that's one of my go-to other than block and stripey, is another, because you're going to see it here in a second, poking in here. It's really tiny. It's actually a cocoas brush, but it's the needle liner. It is small. It's like even smaller than swirly because I love swirly, but it's even tinier. Okay, now I'm going to take, and I'm just going to use I'm not going to super wet my wipe. I'm just going to get a little bit of cleanser on there, and I'm not going to scrub. I'm just going to place and drag. And all that's going to do is make sure that all of my pencil markings around the outside of him are gone. And the reason that I want to do this now is because these base layers are very solid. They're very on there. When you start going in with very tiny bits of shading, sometimes you can pull a little bit of that back off. So I don't want to have to go in and wipe again after I've already started adding in that detail because I don't want to ruin it. Okay. Now we're going to start going in with those details. So I'm going to do a lot of the shading on him first. So his little eyes, I'm going to use Wanna Be My Tarzan or Heavenly, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to start going into his ears here. And don't worry about going all the way to the edge. Because we're also still going to add outlines after this. Now I'm going to use a very teeny tiny amount on my brush. So I'm like literally just, and then I just saw a question in the chat. Instead of wiping, could we put a thin layer of clear top coat in to seal the details, then cure and proceed? So the only reason that I say to wipe beforehand is because those pencil markings, if you have any exposed pencil markings and you top coat it, you will be able to see those pencil markings. So if you have any pencil markings visible outside of your design, you're going to want to wipe it before you proceed with any details, because otherwise it is going to be able to be seen in your design. So that's why I say to make sure that you're wiping it beforehand. Unless you don't have any visible details, then you can absolutely just proceed with the details. You don't have to wipe it away or clear off the inhibition layer if you don't have any visible pencil markings on your design. Okay, so I'm filling in his little ear, which is just so stinking cute. And then I'm using a very tiny amount on my brush, and I'm going to just kind of bring in little bits of color onto the side of his head right here. And I'm making those swooping motions because I want it to almost look like hair. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Very dry brush, very dry. And then bring that down. I'm not going to bring this as far because this ear is kind of supposed to be on the other side of his head, right? So you're going to see more of this side of his head than the other side. Now I'm going to do his little eyes. So I'm going to just, and I'm very lightly, like I'm taking a small amount, and I'm going to just create this kind of outline to where his eye is going to go. And then same thing on the other side. And this doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to go over this again. I'm mostly looking to add the texture towards the top here. And kind of filling in like where his eyes are going to be. And I almost want some of that brown underneath to still be see-through, because I want it to have that textured like fur look. And then we are going to actually go back in and layer more colors in on top of this as well. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that's honestly where a lot of people get caught up. I have to sneeze. Sorry, I had to sneeze really quick. Okay, so I think that people get really caught up in kind of trying to make it perfect right off the bat. And it's, don't worry so much about making it perfect. Just kind of get your colors on like where you want them, and you're going to be able to build it up. So like right now he's looking pretty funky. Like you wouldn't think that's like where he's gonna, that he's gonna end up looking like a really cute little deer. Because right now he's looking a little strange. He's looking a little rabid. But I'm not fully coloring in. Like I said, I want some of this to show through because I want this to look like fur. I'm kind of helping myself so I don't have to come back in later and add so many different layers. Just adding some. And then I'm kind of just going back into the product that's already on here and dragging more of it out. And that way I'm not picking up more product. I'm kind of just pushing it around. And then what I'm going to do is take another brush. You can use your block brush or another like wide flat, but I'm going to just kind of pat kind of in and around what I just did to help kind of rough up the edges so that it's not quite so perfect. Okay. So it's looking a little crazy right now, but I promise it's going to come together. I'm going to use block. And I'm going to kind of wispy little pieces right here on his chest. And same thing over here. I'm just using a very dry brush, and that's going to give that kind of fur effect. Okay. And then I'm going to cure this. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is start bringing in those teeny tiny details before we do any shading. We want to make sure that we have like an idea of where his eyes, his mouth, his nose, like where that's all going to go. And switch that to 30 seconds. Okay. So now I'm going to take that teeny tiny brush I was talking about. And I'm going to use my black gel paint. And I'm going to eyeball where his nose is, which is going to be like right here. And just create the outline of his little, it's kind of just an upside down triangle, really. And this is why I really like the gel paints, because they are just so thick and opaque. And then his little mouth is going to come all the way over to that little cheek right there. And then same thing right there. I'm going to create his eye and his little lash line. So I'm going to create the outline of the eye first. This little lash. And then the darkest part of his eye I'm going to do first. And then looking at the picture, like his eye actually comes a little bit further out, like past his head. So I'm just going to outline a little bit past, kind of filling in that circle so I can come in and add highlights after the fact. And his eyes are really round, very doe-eyed. But they come to a little bit of a teardrop point right there. So you want to make sure that you don't make it too round. You want to still have that shape in there. And the reason I do their lash line first is because I can get that kind of a point. And then I can come in and fill in and create the outside of my circle there. So I'm going to use very light pressure on my brush to pull up that little lash line. Same thing on the bottom. I want the top and the bottom to come a little bit further past the eye. And then I'm going to fill that in with black. And if you find you fill too much in, that's okay, because we're going to go back in with white anyway. Okay, so there's his eyes. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. Because looking at the picture, his eye kind of sits like right up against that cheek. So that's kind of where I want that to go. Okay, so now I'm going to cure that. And then another question in the chat, you prefer gel paints over buttercream? I don't necessarily prefer one over the other. It just depends on what I'm doing. I honestly, I love them both equally. ButterCreams and gel paints are definitely my two favorite products and probably my most used in the salon outside of like base products. But it just depends on what I'm doing. So for fine details like that, yes, I tend to prefer gel paints. But for shading, like overall coverage, I really like using ButterCreams. So now we're going to go in with darker brown here. So we're going to use Please Be Seated. And I'm going to come in and start adding more low lights into his fur. So I'm creating a little bit of darkness at the bridge of his nose here. And I'm kind of darkening up his little brow bone just slightly. And you just want to be careful when you're using darker colors around eyes. You want to make sure that you're just kind of double checking that you don't make it too dark around the eyebrows because that can make him look mean. We don't want that. And I'm starting to feel like this is actually really good because I can show you guys. I feel like his head's a little small on one side. So what I'm actually going to do right now really quick is take That Really Resonates. And I'm going to create just a little bit more thickness on one side of his head. So this is super easy to fix because we're just going to add on. Okay, see, I like how that looks. He's a little bit chunkier now. So I'm just going to use my brush very dry. And it's the same thing I was actually going to do next, but I'm just blending a little bit more of that brown back into the off-white fur that I added to create more texture, more density, and make it look a little less harsh. And that's kind of where you get a little bit more of that, not only vintage look, but more like realism. So since I already have this out, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit to the tips of his ears. And yes, it is truly this chaotic when I'm working on a client. So you guys are just along for the ride right now. And like I said, just using that very dry brush. Okay. So I like how we've kind of rounded out his cheek a little bit more. So I really like how that looks. So now I'm going to cure that. Now I'm going back to my Please Be Seated. And I'm going to go back into adding some more like darker details in and around the edges here. Going to add a little bit more right under his eyes on his little cheeks. Kind of in between everywhere that there is lighter and darker fur. I'm kind of blending in between the two. So right at the top of his ears, kind of like inside his ear. Gonna add some more dark brown. More Please Be Seated. Same thing on this side. We're just kind of breaking up where it's really dark and where it's really light. And I'm gonna add a little bit of shadowing under the bow, because this is on his chest, and so you want to think like this is sitting on him. So some light would be kind of hitting that, and there would be some darkness underneath of that bow. Same thing with the outside of the bow over here. Just a little bit. And then I'm just going to, again, I'm basically applying dollops of color and then kind of using them to dip and pull like to put my brush back into and pull out onto the rest of the design. You can kind of see how I'm just creating more and more texture. And then I also, just looking at this, I want his eyes to be maybe angled slightly more. So I'm going to go back in with that really resonates. And just ever so slightly make him look a little bit more chipper. Okay. Yeah, I like that better. Okay, so he's looking really cute. I'm going to go ahead and cure that. And then for our final highlights on him, or low lights, sorry, I'm going to take Cranberry Craze. This guy. And I'm going to just add some low lights to his bow. So just kind of around the edges first. And then I'm going to create the little like wrap of my bow. So that little fold on top. And now this isn't quite as much like realism because this picture is like more vintage, more of an old style. So there's not as much shading per se. So you want to add a lot of your shading with the same color, just in darker and lighter tones. That's going to give you that kind of like vintage Christmas vibe. Because if I come in and I start adding too much shadowing, it doesn't really look accurate to those art pieces. So then again, I'm just using the excess of gel on the sides here and just pulling that towards the center. And again, the reason I'm doing that is just because I don't want to add too many dark colors and I don't want to add too much gel. So when I'm adding a little bit on the outlines, just pulling it in from the outline helps save that so much. Okay, so we're going to cure that. And then there's another question in the chat. Do you have all the gel paint colors or do you have the basics and mix them? But so both. I do have all of the packs of gel paints. We have a primary pack that has 6 colors. All of our packs have 6 colors. So we have a primary pack that has, primary red, green, blue, yellow, black, white. And then we have a pastel pack that is all 6 pastel colors. And then we have a neon pack that's all 6 neon colors. So I do like to have all of them on hand in my drawer. But I do also I have a palette. I actually took it home because I was doing my nails, but it's from Gemini Cosmetics. You can find them. I have them linked in my link tree in my bio with a discount code, but they have mixing palettes like with lids. So I put a lot of my buttercreams and a lot of my like gel paints mixed together inside of that. So that's a really great thing to grab if you like mixing your colors. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone in and added the darkness on that, one last thing we're going to do before we top coat and add final details, I'm going to take Provocative. So it's an even darker brown than Please Be Seated, and it has a little bit more of a red tone. I'm going to take that and just very lightly outline. And again, I'm not using a super harsh outline because I'm going for that more vintagey look. And those are all very, they have like hand-drawn vibes, not super illustrated vibes. So then I'm just going to outline his ear just a little bit. And I'm honestly using such light pressure that I'm not even getting a full solid line when I'm doing this. I'm using a very dry brush and very light pressure. And then there was another question, will you post it on your Instagram for us to see a nice close-up when you are done? Also, I loved your peach design. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I definitely will post this on my Instagram afterwards so that you guys can see it up close. And I do sometimes forget to do that. So if I don't, somebody bug me. Okay, and then I'm going to use that same color and just outline the rest of him as well. And then I just want to add a few more like little details, like little hair right under his eye and on his cheeks with a little bit of a darker brown to kind of almost look like he has a little bit of, not blush, but you know, he's happy, he's smiling. Okay, so now I'm going to cure that. And I'm only going to flash cure that because I also want to show you guys, since we're running out of time a little bit, I'm going to use 2 greens, G.I. Jane and Luxurious. And I'm just going to create really quick on the side here, like a little tree. And this is super easy because I'm just going to take this color and the little bit that I have on my brush, and I'm just applying a lot of pressure and then a little bit of pressure and just kind of flicking it towards my other hand. And I think this is kind of cute, like even just as an outline for the nail. It's really fun. And then just again, like this design very consistently has been about using what's already on the design, what's already on the nail. And that's going to really help you a lot. And I'm going to create like a little bit of a longer branch here. You can get so much done quickly with more like nature designs just because nature is imperfect. So you can kind of just, even though I'm just swooping my brush around, like you get the idea, you can see what's going on. So now I'm going to cure that, and then I will go in with my darker green Luxurious and do literally the same thing. So just for time's sake, I'm going to pull that out. But always make sure when you, like I said, when you're doing those base layers, you always want to make sure that you are doing a full cure before you go in and start adding anything crazy. So I'm just going to go back over that lighter green with darker. And I still want some of that lighter green to show through, so I'm not going too crazy. And then same thing on the other side. And that's the thing that I love about ButterCreams. If you vary the pressure, you're going to get a different tone. Like one, you're going to get very opaque, but then if you lighten your pressure and you use less product, you can kind of get like that sheer, almost jelly look without actually mixing or using it with clear. There's another question in the chat while that's curing. Is there a primary green gel paint? If not, can I kindly request a primary green, gold gel paint, and silver gel paint? So there is not a gold and silver gel paint. We do, however, have gold and silver metallic buttercream, which are fantastic. And I do feel like they are a little bit of a thicker consistency than the other buttercreams. I think it's just because of how metallic the pigment is. And then we do have a primary green gel paint. I'll show that to you guys really quick. So this is our primary green. It's really pretty. One of my favorite things to do actually with the gel paint is to mix it with Jade Butter Bling, and you end up with a really pretty emerald green shimmer, and it's perfect for Christmas. And then another question in there is, what is your favorite green buttercream for leaf nail art? Honestly, probably the ones that I just used for this tree. I love using the 2 of these. If I'm doing a lighter leaf, I'll do G.I. Jane, and then the background here that's emotionally drained, I use that a lot for leaves as well. Okay, so before we wrap up with our final details here, I'm going to go in with flat matte, and I'm actually going to top coat the whole thing before we add our final details. Now with flat matte, when you're using this, you want to make sure that you are applying a little bit of pressure when you're brushing it on. You don't want to apply it too thick, because if you do, it can actually make it a little more shadowy and a less matte, like it looks a little more suede. So just make sure that you're not applying it too heavily. I'm going to go ahead and cure that for 60 seconds. And then since we're here and we can, and I can show you guys more stuff, I'm going to use, so these are really fun. These are like pixie dust glitters. These are from Gemini Cosmetics as well. I get a lot of my nail art supplies, like non-LE products or things that like we don't make. I get a lot of them from Gemini Cosmetics. They have a ton of nail art supplies. But this, you basically just use like a little puffer bottle and you can put the glitter. I like that it's got this little nozzle on it, so you can put the glitter really close to the nail and then add it on in a 3D. And then I see a question here that's about a flat mat with their bottle. I would honestly just say to reach out to HQ. You should be able to message. I think Angela's out, but you should be able to reach out to somebody at HQ and let them know, and then maybe they can check the batch number just in case. Okay, so now that's cured, I'm going to just remove that inhibition layer. And so now you can already see it's bringing out a lot of the detail. So now we're going to grab our white gel paint. And this is where I'm going to go in and just add my little highlights. So I'm going to add tiny little spots on his little butt there. And I'm just using varying pressure to create different shapes. I want that one to be a little bit thicker. Okay. And then I'm going to come in and add highlights to his eyes. Which is going to make a huge difference. And just a teeny, teeny, tiny little highlight to his nose. And then I'm just going to add a very thin, very dry brushing, just a tiny bit of gel paint onto his antlers. And then I'm just going to add a tiny little bit on the top of this bow as well. And we're really not trying to do much. I'm just trying to define a little bit of the details here. And it's kind of crazy how you could add so little, but sometimes it adds so much. Okay, so I'm going to cure that. And then I'm going to go back to my just white. And then while that's curing, I see another question. If you put too much gel, do you use swipe to remove or just a dry wipe? Can you clarify that a little bit for me? When you say swipe, do you mean like just wipe it with my brush? Or like you mean if I'm doing nail art, if I put too much gel? Because if I'm doing nail art and oh, cleanser. Okay, so yeah, I usually don't use cleanser. I typically just will, if I have a little bit too much on the nail, I will actually kind of scoop and pick it up with my nail art brush and then wipe it back into the container and then kind of try to like clean it up a little bit while I'm working on it. Okay, so gel paint, you don't have to top coat, so I'm just going to cleanse that a little bit. And now I'm going to go back in with my just white. And this is just, you don't have to add this step, but this is just for fun. And we're here to have fun. So I'm going to add some snow on these trees. So I'm just using my brush to kind of create these warbly little snow piles. And by doing this, I'm just applying kind of varying pressure, except I'm really shaking and wobbling my brush. And you could do as much or as little as you want. I'm going to do a little bit over here too on these guys. And with snow, you kind of want to have a little bit more piled on at the bottom, like more of that little bit of a drop or variation at the bottom, and then a little bit flatter on top. I just always try to think about how it actually looks in real life. Okay, and then I'm going to take my little poofy glitter guy here. And I'm just going to dust this onto the wet gel. I say dust, I guess it's more like poof. I'm poofing it onto the white gel because you just squeeze it a little bit and then it comes out onto the nail. Okay, so now we have texture there with glitter. Let me go ahead and cure that. Now I'm doing that as a full 60-second cure. Getting rid of my excess glitter here. All over myself. Guess it's the holidays though. We're all covered in glitter. Who am I kidding? Okay, and while we're here, while that's curing, I always have to touch on brushes and brush care anytime that I do a power hour. So please, guys, if you're using a synthetic hairbrush, do not use cleanser on it. Always use a clean, dry wipe. And if you're going to store it for the day, like you're all done, wipe it with a clean, dry wipe. Run it through some clear gel if you need to remove any color that's stuck in it, and then put it away. Do not use cleanser on synthetic brushes. You can use cleanser on natural hair brushes, but not synthetic. So anytime that you're cleaning like your block brush or your stripey or your swirly, make sure that you're using a clean, dry wipe and not one with cleanser on it. Okay, so that is that little guy done, top coated, and then we have some glistening snow on the trees here. And I just think he's so cute. If we don't have any questions, then I will.
Ashley,
Yeah.
sorry, I've got a question. I think you missed it in the chat. Just want to double check. Let's say you draw a line and the line's too thick. How would you thin the line out? Would you go in with a little, I've got some of those little, it looks like a toothpick with some cotton wool on the top, but that normally has a bit of hairs and yeah, I don't like using that. So I normally try and wipe, but then I'm scared to use the cleanser. So that's what I was actually trying to ask earlier on. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're totally fine. That clears that up a lot for me. Thank you. No, I usually try to avoid using cleanser just because the cleanser can like affect the buttercream, like it can blend with it. So usually what I do is I prefer to take my block brush, this guy, because it's very flat and square. And so I'll like really heavily wipe that off. I'll make sure there's no gel on it. And I'll just go in with a dry brush and run right alongside the line. That's my preferred way to do it. If I really messed it up and that's not enough to kind of fix it, then I'll usually just remove the whole thing and start over with a little bit of cleanser on a wipe. And then I thought I saw another question come through in the chat. Oh, how long would this take you on a client? So I feel like the process definitely takes me longer on Power Hour because I'm talking and I'm walking you guys through it. Whereas on a client, I'm more just going. And also, my desk is a mess when like when I have all the colors out, they're always all open, so I'm kind of just dipping and going. Most of my clients, though, that I book nail art of that level, I typically add on an hour to their service, so just an hour for nail art. But then other clients who want like that plus other detailed nail art on the other nails as well. A couple of my really intricate nail art clients, I usually book them 3 to 4 hours, depending on how intricate and how custom the set is. So if they wanted one of those little deer on each hand, one on each hand, and then, or even two, like the deer and the doe on each hand, and then some snowflakes and some candy stripes, like things like that, I'll usually book 3.5 to 4 hours. And I mean, that's like on top of usually like a long nail fill or something like that. Not just if it's short nails or like more natural nails, like a structured gel manicure, then I definitely do more like 2.5 to 3 hours. So yeah, it varies, but I would say I don't typically spend more than 4 hours except for with a few exceptions. I have some crazy sets. I've definitely had people here longer, but they're also longtime clients and we have a lot, we talk, we get snacks, like it's a process. So I'm not super into rushing myself anymore. It's more like I spend a lot of time perfecting the designs. I saw another. You're the Bob Ross of nails with this creation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I used to stay home sick. Like when I was homesick from school, I would always watch Bob Ross. I loved him. Please do a power hour on your drawers, how you store your buttercreams, etc. Yeah, I can definitely do that. If you guys ever have any other power hour ideas or any things that you want to see, definitely feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I did put my Instagram in the chat. It's badash_nails. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and being a part of the Light Elegance family and tuning into Power Hour every week. We couldn't do it without you guys. We really appreciate you, and we will see you next week.